Yeah. And then the action.
All righty, you guys ready to get started? It's 2:00. All right, thanks for taking time out of this beautiful Sunday, come in and talk about a really boring topic, profitability. But farm profitability is really important and it's dear to my heart. Being a farmer, so I really appreciate y'all come in, talk about this. When I was farming, one of my coworkers turned me on to, having an end of the year meeting, talk about all the things that we could do better, things that were working, things that were not working. It was the hardest meeting of the year for me. I always hated it. But it was a meeting that I learned the most from and really allowed me to grow the most as a farmer. So it is a hard topic to talk about, things you can do better, but it's always important to look at those things. Great. Now my thing's not scrolling through again. Thought I solved this problem, but maybe not. Okay, so a lot of times I've, been in presentations where I haven't felt comfortable asking questions. So I created this way to ask anonymous questions. If you don't feel comfortable asking questions in front of everyone else, feel free to scan this QR code. It's on your agenda as well. And then Michael will ask the question for you instead. Okay, so I'm gonna presentation overview. I'm gonna go over my background and experience with farming and farmers markets. We're gonna look at Roanoke region farm metrics. Then we're gonna bring Kevin in to talk about the difference between for-profit businesses, hobby businesses, and nonprofits. Then we're gonna look at case studies across the entire country of places that have profitable markets. And we're gonna look at research on factors that affect the sales at farmers markets. And then we're going to look at an analysis of the farmers markets in the Roanoke region. And then we're going to go into CSA history, types, and the CSA marketplace in Roanoke. Okay, so I have several decades experience farming on the West Coast and the East Coast. I've I've sold at markets in California, South Carolina, Virginia, and North Carolina. I've started markets that have been successful. I've started markets that were complete failures. And I've managed markets. I also have experience with community supported agriculture, CSA programs in South Carolina and North Carolina. And I also have experience selling to various aggregators and wholesale distributors. Farmed at various scales, small as my front yard or backyard to as large as 12 acres of 12 acres in production, done animal production, bees, and vegetables. So the last farm I managed, the farm owner required me to keep detailed records of our sales and where our sales outlets were located and those different the revenues from the different markets that we had. So this is just, I started that farm with him and managed it for 3 years. So just looking at our different sales avenues, most of our sales came from our CSA marketplace. Next was our farmers markets. And then third was our wholesale outlets. I also looked at how much money we made per acre for those different outlets. So our CSA retail outlets made us the most at about $37,000 per acre. And then our wholesale markets made the least at about $15,000 per acre. So the metrics that I looked at for Roanoke are the measures that I'm looking at here: farmer listening sessions, National Agriculture Statistical Service (USDA) Ag Census direct to consumer sales data. Also looking at market to acre metrics. I conducted informal farmer surveys about their CSA sales. Also looked at case studies of cities with higher direct-to-consumer sales. And I looked at a statistical analysis of 109 farmers markets. I looked at the feasibility report on the market analysis in support of a Roanoke Food Hub feasibility. And then I also looked at Master Gardener, farmers market contacts, and also made market observations. But before we get into those, I've asked Kevin Jones to talk to us about the difference between a farming business, farming as a hobby, and not-for-profit farming. Kevin Jones has over 40 years of experience counseling clients on the tax aspects of business transaction, and he has extensive experience negotiating and litigating tax controversies at the federal and state levels. He has performed research in tax planning and implemented tax minimization strategies for business entities in a variety of industries, including government contracting, high technology, manufacturers, distributors, mass media, construction, real estate, hospitality, retail, and professional services. In addition, in a prior role, he was a tax advisor to the Washington Redskins. All right, Kevin, are you there still?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yep. Everyone hear him? All right.
All right. Thank you so much, Shawn. I'm happy to be here and, very happy to speak to you. I am a tax professional. I don't really, I've never farmed. I have had a number of clients over the years that have been farmers, and I have actually handled disputes with the IRS over the particular status of the activity. And so I do have some experience, at least in the world that I operate, which is tax law, in addressing issues related to farming. And as well as in the nonprofit arena, I have spent a significant amount of time helping businesses obtain nonprofit status and maintain that status, and working with the IRS on things that kind of start to look like they're crossing over between a not-for-profit mission versus a commercial activity. So I welcome questions as I go through or when I'm done with this, because I'm going to hit this on a very high level. So, but initially, so you think about a trade or business, any kind of a trade or business, but a trade or business of farming. And for tax purposes, this is really something where you are engaging in this with the primary intention of making a profit. And when you compare that with what we're going to look at in a minute, which is a hobby or with a nonprofit, the missions are different. And so with something that rises to the level of a trade or business, it has the profit motive as the primary intention. But in order to have that, you have to be doing it in a certain way with regularity and continuity. You have to operate it in a professional manner. And so when the IRS is looking at a particular activity, and I use that term activity, in this case, farming, when they're looking at it and trying to classify it, does it rise to the level of a trade or business? They're going to look at a bunch of different factors. How much time and effort are you devoting to it? What is the history that you've had with this type of business and your expertise, other types of businesses? Do you make changes to try and improve your profitability? And all of this is relevant because when you have something that rises to the level of a trade or business, you have the ability to deduct against your revenues the expenses that you incur in conducting that business. And so, and if your expenses actually exceed your revenue, you can, in fact, use that loss that you end up with to offset other income that you have. And so that's kind of one of the critical factors of achieving this status of being a trade or business for tax purposes. Now, if we go to the next slide, I think we skipped one. Yeah, just very quickly, I mentioned that if you are a trade or business, this unlocks this ability to deduct expenses that you incur. What expenses can you deduct? Well, you can deduct things that are what are considered ordinary, necessary, and reasonable. And each of those is kind of a specific term that courts have grappled with and sort of defined. For the most part, they're they're pretty straightforward and easy to understand. You know, you think about farming and something that maybe is pushing beyond the limits. If you're a farmer and you decide I'm going to take a trip to the Napa wine region, you know, wineries, those are farming activities. And you're going to travel around for 10 or 12 days, enjoying the countryside and going to wine tastings. There's a very significant amount of personal pleasure and recreation involved in that, much more so than maybe what you're getting in terms of the education that you need to help run your own farm better. So that might fail this ordinary, necessary, and reasonable test. But for the most part, whatever you're doing to conduct your business that's related to the business, and again, we use these terms ordinary, necessary, and reasonable for that purpose. Those are the expenses that would be able to reduce the revenues from your farming business. Okay, next slide. Okay, so now contrast that with something where we don't really have a profit motive, and it's sometimes very difficult, and it's a fine line there as to when we have crossed over the line from not having that profit motive to being a trader business. And so there's a number of factors that are looked at here. They're very similar to the ones we just went through, but and we'll have the next slide, but hold on to that for just a second. In looking at it, you think, how much personal pleasure are we deriving from the activity, and various factors. And I have a couple of things here: raising horses, things that are typically thought of as hobby activities, sailboat racing, gardening, and I have there farming. I put that, but one additional item that I'll mention, because I think it's a little bit easy to understand. If you think about gambling, and a person that goes to Atlantic City or Las Vegas once in a while and engages in gambling while they're there, they may win a little bit, but they have losses that they incur. And so because that is a hobby activity, they do not get that benefit of being able to deduct those expenses. Now, there was a case that made it all the way to the Supreme Court where they said you could be doing this in enough of a regular, continuous nature where you could become in the trader business of gambling, in which case you would get to deduct your losses. So all of these other activities, raising horses, sailboat racing, gardening, and farming, can certainly be trader business activities. But if they are not conducted in a way that meets sort of the facts and circumstances tests that are applied, then it's going to be considered a hobby. And in that case, right now, it's a very harsh result. You will report all of your revenues from that hobby activity on your tax return, but currently you can deduct none of the expenses that you incurred. Now, prior to the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017, there was the ability to deduct expenses subject to certain limits up to the amount of revenue. So you could get your bottom line to zero. You couldn't show a loss, but you could get it to zero. But since we had the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017, which are expiring at the end of this year, but Congress is going to extend those cuts one way or another, but this type of provision is going to be included in it. You can deduct none of the expenses that you incur in that activity. So it's a very harsh result if you are stuck in this hobby category. So we can go to the next slide. These are sort of factors, again, and they're very similar to what I spoke about in the trader business activity. These are things that are indicative of whether or not you are pursuing the activity for a profit. How are you conducting the activity, the time and effort expended? What's your expertise? What is the expectation that the assets you have will increase in value? Do you occasionally earn profits? And what are you doing to try to change from being in a continual loss position to try and have profits at least in some years. Okay, if we can go to the next slide. There is a presumptive rule that if you show a profit in 3 out of 5 years, it is presumed that you do have a profit motive. Now, that presumption is what's referred to as a rebuttable presumption, but it's a big thing because at that point, the burden of proof shifts from you to the IRS, and they have to prove that you do not have a profit motive. The presumption is if you have had profits in 3 out of 5 years, that you have a profit motive, and it would be up to the IRS to actually prove otherwise. And I can tell you that in most cases, they would not even challenge it at that point. So, but otherwise, normally, if you have not shown profits, then the burden of proof is on you to show that you do have a profit motive. And I've had clients over the years that were challenged by the IRS farming operations where there was no doubt in my mind that they were doing everything they could to earn a profit. Sometimes I felt the IRS was asking the question too soon. It takes a little bit of time sometimes to go from a startup phase where you're definitely incurring losses into a phase where you can earn profits. And so I've been involved in those battles where the IRS is looking at these various factors. It's much tougher when the burden of proof is on the taxpayer themselves. So, okay, next slide. Okay, so shifting again. So hobby, trader business, and comparing that with not-for-profit entities, okay? And a lot of times, not-for-profit entities may be doing things that kind of look like commercial activities, but to qualify to obtain tax-exempt status, and there's two aspects to that. There's the ability to not pay income taxes on your income, and there's also the ability to receive contributions from people, and they get a tax deduction for the contribution. So to qualify, there's a whole bunch of rules that you have to go through to get that status, that tax exempt status. You have to have a specific qualifying purpose: educational, charitable, research-based. You have to limit the personal financial gain, and you cannot take your profits. If you can have profits as a nonprofit, but they have to be reinvested in the activities that you're doing. It is not something that is typically seen in farming. There are some nonprofit farms around the country, but it's not something that's typically seen. But normally when you do see it, it includes things like urban farms that have educational programs or community gardens, or farms that are used solely for research. And you will see them in those situations. They can work in tandem with for-profit farms. Sometimes maybe there is excess that has been harvested by a for-profit farm that can be donated to a nonprofit farm or to some other who can help to get it distributed to needy community members. So things like that. And there's a number of benefits to having this tax exempt status. One of which is, yes, no, you don't have to pay any income tax if you earn income. There are some benefits from the standpoint of under labor laws. Now, I'm not a labor attorney, and so I'm not fully versed on labor laws, but if you are a nonprofit, you can have volunteers work for you, donate their time. But in the context of a regular business, there are labor laws that apply, and you are likely to have to pay your employees, a minimum wage for the work that they're doing. And so, but because of those benefits that the nonprofit activity has over the for-profit activity, the idea is that they're not actually competing with the for-profit businesses because they would have a competitive advantage. And so they need to be fostering and furthering a mission that's charitable, educational, scientific, et cetera. Next slide. And so there's also, in some cases, there are not-for-profit grocery stores. Now, this is a very interesting category to me, because, you know, a grocery store, if you had one in the middle of town right next to, you know, the Harris Teeter, you know, what's the difference? And so here again, though, they do have to meet the tax exempt mission requirements that the IRS has. And you normally you would see this in sort of an underserved area where there's really no other stores available. But again, the challenge would be, you know, that you know, you can't be carrying out essentially commercial activities while using the benefits of the tax exempt status. For example, deductible donations, no income tax, real estate tax exemptions, you know, and the use of volunteer labor. They could work in conjunction with a for-profit grocery store if they're in underserved areas and the for-profit grocery store has excess excess food that's going to spoil. They could transfer it to the nonprofit that could then distribute it to needy households in these rural, either urban or rural communities, if they're doing that. And this is all different. You know, you could say, well, what's the difference between that and, you know, the Girl Scouts selling their cookies? Well, you know, the Girl Scouts are the cookie sales of the Girl Scouts are actually part of their mission. They're training the girls in business and that's seen as part of their mission. So there's always these sort of fine lines that you run across. But avoiding this challenge of, are we conducting something that is primarily a commercial activity, or are we trying to further a charitable mission, is a difficult line to draw and to meet and to understand. So anyway, so just that's a quick overview. If there's questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them. I appreciate the opportunity to be here, though.
Any questions for Kevin before we move on?
I have one. So about the profitability, waiting for 2 out of 5, 2 out of 7 years. Formerly trying an orchard, and I don't expect to see money flowing in for 4 to 5 years, much less in profit might take the 6th or 7th year out. So you're a problem with that. I'm on my 2nd year putting in a F form income tax, and I have documented losses. We're talking huge right now. They'll get bigger as time goes on. So,
Did you hear that question, Kevin?
Yes, I think the question is, you're in a sort of a startup phase where you're going to have an orchard, but it takes a little time to produce enough of your product to actually become profitable. And that is the startup phase, you know, it is a factor. Now, I'm not going to tell you the IRS is not going to come and challenge you in the 4th or 5th year or something like that, but I think you would have a very strong case to sort of lay it out. Look, yes, I have started this, and here's what I've done. Here's what I'm doing. Here's when it's going to start to turn around and become profitable. And so, and now, I said, I'm not going to say the IRS would not challenge you on that. I don't believe if you are doing something and you have the proper intent. Yes, my intent is to make a profit at this business, and I know there's a startup period. I would never not do something, for example, deduct these expenses as if you're a trade or business because of a fear of the IRS coming after you. If you're right, you're right. And so that's really where I would be on that. I think you're going to be fine. Now, if 10 years from now, it's not working out the way you'd hope, then, you know, the IRS might have a stronger case.
Good question. Any more questions for Kevin before we move on? Hunter?
How rigorously is this enforced?
The question was, how rigorously is this enforced?
Enforced? Well, right now the IRS is really in kind of a difficult position as far as the manpower. So it is an area. The hobby loss area is a big area of focus for them because there's so much abuse that goes on there. But there's so many different areas of things that could be called hobbies. And is farming a particular focus? It's on their radar, but I think right now, it's not. I don't think you're likely to see as much audit activity just because of their manpower issues they have. So I think, and from my perspective as a tax professional, in terms of taking a position on a tax return, we have to always assume that the IRS is going to find out. They're going to identify the issue and they're going to be able to uncover all the facts related to it. And then you ask yourself, are we right or wrong? And so that's the standards that I always have to apply.
One more question here.
Does a formal business plan help you when talking to the IRS, having one that's all done up?
Yes, that's absolutely a great thing to have. One of the things they're looking at is, are you doing this in a professional way? And that includes, do you have a business plan? Do you maintain proper accounting records? Do you keep all the paperwork and documentation supporting what you're doing? All of those things are tremendous facts.
Thank you so much, Kevin. Appreciate that. Very
Yeah.
informative.
You're welcome. I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Okay, so one of the measures that I looked at were farmer listening sessions that occurred. And I found those in the Roanoke Valley Local Food Plan 2020. And they asked, what are the 3 biggest challenges as a food producer to our local farmers? And the top 2 challenges were cost of production and making a profit. So just looking at the raw data there, cost of production, number 1 challenge for our growers, and making a profit was a number 2 challenge for our growers in that farmer listening session. Another measure that I looked at is the market to acre measure. So when I first moved to Roanoke as a farmer, one thing that kind of shocked me was how many markets it took to sell an acre of produce. The more markets it takes to sell an acre of produce means that those markets are less profitable. If it takes 1 market to sell 5 acres of produce, and that's a very profitable market. So I looked at, how many, and the markets that and the places that I've lived and the markets that I've sold at, how many markets did it take me to sell an acre of produce? So when I was in farming in Chester, South Carolina, our markets were in Charlotte, North Carolina. We had 3 markets. We had a CSA market, we had one farmer's market that happened once a week, and we had a wholesale market, and we had 12 acres of production. So you take 3 markets, divide that by 12, and you get 0.25 markets per acre. So the lower the ratio, the lower that number, then the more profitable the markets are. And of course, not all of that acreage wasn't equally split. Most of our acreage went to our CSA market because that was our largest marketplace. The other place I farmed in Clemson, South Carolina, which is a city of 15,000 people. In comparison, Roanoke is a city of 100,000 people. And Clemson, South Carolina, population 15,000. I had 2 markets, a CSA marketplace and a wholesale marketplace, and 6 acres of production. So 2 divided by 6, that's 0.33 markets to acre.
Is that assuming sellout?
What's that?
Is that assuming sellout of everything?
Yeah, yep.
Share this presentation, but it sound out.
Yes, I can share this. Okay, so I analyzed the markets the farms that were selling in Roanoke. So the first farm that I looked at, they had 6 markets. They had a wholesale market, a CSA market. They were selling at 3 farmers markets, and they had a farm stand. And when I analyzed their acreage on GIS, I saw that they were selling 3/4 of an acre. So 6 markets divided by 3/4 of an acre, that's 8 markets to sell 1 acre of produce. The second farm that I looked at, they had 4 markets, a wholesale market, a CSA marketplace, 2 Roanoke farmers markets, and they had 1.4 acres in production that I measured on GIS. So that's 2.9 markets per acre. The third farm, 1 market, they were selling at the Salem farmers market, and they had 0.1 acres in production. But that farmer informed me that he wasn't able to sell all the produce from that 0.1 acres at that market, and he was looking to sell at another market too. So that ratio is 10 markets per acre. Another farm that I looked at, they had 2 marketplaces, a wholesale market and then the Salem farmers market to 1 acre of production. So that comes out to 2 markets per acre. And the 5th farm that I looked at, They had one market in Salem to 0.4 acres in production, which comes out to 2.5 markets per acre. Okay, I also looked at USDA National Agriculture Statistical Service data, and they did an analysis in 2015 and another analysis in 2020. So I've got two maps of the United States side by side, so you can see how that changed from 2015 to 2020. So you can see most of the direct-to-consumer sales. This is direct-to-consumer sales, which are basically sales that farmers make at farmers markets, through CSAs, through local aggregators, through farm stands. So in the west coast of the country, you can see down there, they had 35% of their farm sales were direct-to-consumer, and that went down between 2015 and 2020. In the northwestern area of the country, that actually went up between 2015 and 2020. In the Northeast, it also went up, and around the Great Lakes, it stayed the same. And in the Mid-Atlantic and the Southeast, it actually went down. So just looking at the sales by category for those statistics, on-farm stores were the highest sales, then farmers markets. CSA marketplace stayed the same between those two years. Some more data that I looked at that came out of the USDA, National Agriculture Statistical Service, is they did an analysis by county level. So every green dot represents $2.5 million in direct-to-consumer sales. So wherever you see a green dot, that means that county had 2.5 million in direct-to-consumer sales. So you can see these clusters of green dots, these green zones, where a lot of direct consumer sales are being made. So zooming in on Virginia and the Roanoke area, you can see we have very little direct to consumer sales in our region. Franklin County has, two green dots, so they have a lot, and that's probably from Homestead Creamery. Okay, so we're going to explore case studies of cities around the country that are located next to these green zones, these green areas where they have a lot of direct-to-consumer sales. So the first two cities that we're going to look at are Hillsboro, Oregon, which has a similar population. I tried to pick cities out that has similar population to Roanoke. So Roanoke has a population of 100,000, but if you look at the metropolitan area around Roanoke, it's really about 200,000 people in that total metropolitan area. So I tried to find cities that were similar in size or to what we have here. So Hillsboro, Oregon, population 106,000. They have 8 farmers market hours a week. They've got 1 market a week in downtown Hillsboro, and then they have another market on Sunday. The markets are not on the same day, not at the same time, not very many market hours a week. I tried to pick one farm that was selling in that area and do that market to acre ratio to see how many markets it was taking to sell an acre of produce. I just randomly picked the first farm that I could figure out that was mostly selling produce, and then I could actually determine how many acres they had in production. So the farm there, I looked at Martinez Family Farm. They're going to 5 farmers markets, and they have 28 acres of vegetables in production, and their market to acre ratio is 0.18. Boulder City, population of 104,000. They have 1 market in downtown Boulder on Saturday. They also have another Saturday market in Longmont, which is about 14.5 miles away. So they're spread far apart, even though they're on the same day and the same time. And then they have another market on Wednesday from 4 to 8. So their total market hours for that city area was 15. The farm there, the Crop Family Farm, they have 2 farmers markets, a CSA and a wholesale market. So 4 total markets, 7.5 acres in production, 0.53 markets per acre. Okay, so some more green zone case studies. Those red arrows pointing to those cities that we're going to look at. Chico, California, population of 102,000. They have 1 market on Saturday. The total markets in that area, 13 market hours. They also have another market on Wednesday and another on Thursday. None of them are on the same day and at the same time. They're spread out. The farm that I looked at there, Pyramid Farms, they're going to one farmer's market. They have a wholesale market. So 2 total markets to 5.75 acres in production, and their market to acre ratio is 0.35. In Davis, California.
That mean, ratio.
Yeah, so how many markets does it take to sell 1 acre of produce? So a market ratio of 0.35 means that basically 3 acres of one market is supported by about 3 acres of produce. In Davis, California, population 65,000. They have 8 total farmer market hours a week. They have a Saturday market from 8 to 1 and a Wednesday market from 3 to 6, not on the same day or the same time, but they are in the same place. The farm that I looked at there, the Schletwitz family farm, they go to 75 farmers markets over a pretty broad area, and they travel pretty far to get to these farmers markets. And they have 300 acres in production. Now, some of that was tree fruit production, which requires more acreage. This wasn't strictly vegetables, but still their market to acre ratio is 0.25, meaning, 4 acres supported each market that they went to. And just a side note, I had a harvest manager that I worked with, and she came from Mountain Bounty Farm, which is near Chico, and they had 18 acres in production, and all of that went to their CSA program. So one market, one CSA marketplace served 18 acres of production. Okay, so bringing it back to the East Coast, which we don't really have a lot of these green zones on the East Coast. So I wanted to find some, where the green dots are clustered here and look at some cities in those areas. So I took a look at Augusta, Georgia. Unfortunately, their farmers market website didn't have what farmers were listed there, so I didn't get a market to acre ratio for that area. But they basically have 9.5 total market hours a week. They do have 2 markets on the same day and at the same time, but they are spread apart by about 10 miles. And they have another market on Thursday. Asheville, North Carolina, population of 95,000. They actually have 83 farmers market hours a week. They have the Western North Carolina Farmers Market, which is a regional market, which operates every day of the week, which is about 5 miles from the downtown Asheville market. They also have 3 markets kind of in close proximity on the same day and the same time. And they have markets in the communities surrounding Asheville as well. Now, I did mentor several farmers that were farming in the Asheville area, and one of their complaints was that the farmers markets in Asheville are not very profitable. So I did hear that from local farmers there. And their goal was to switch to CSA because they felt like the CSAs would be more profitable for them. So the farm that I looked at there, Highgate Farms, they have 3 farmers markets, a CSA program, so 4 total markets, and they had 1.94 acres in production. So their market to acre ratio is 2 markets per acre of produce. So very similar to what we're seeing in Roanoke.
CSA.
CSA, that's a good question, is community supported agriculture. So that's like a subscription service where you sell boxes of veggies as a subscription.
Shawn, what is the production level now for projected production level now for the Asheville area?
Oh, that's okay.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know the answer to that.
Do you have any indicators that they are going to be able to prepare themselves?
Yeah, that's yeah, I don't know what after Hurricane Helene did all that damage. I don't know how that affected their markets. But yeah, I do I have a friend there, and I sent him a bunch of APO's tubers to help support them. I donated a bunch of plants to them to try to help them out. But yeah, they do need our support as well as the growers in Southwest Virginia. So I looked at some other case studies around the Great Lakes. There were some clusters of a lot of green dots. So wanted to see what was going on in those areas.
Is that substantiated maybe by, all of the community gardens and the efforts that they have now to do neighborhood market, neighborhood growing?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know the answer to that one either. Yeah, they do have a lot of community gardens in that area though.
Now, they didn't used to have, but since we started the efforts and the spread and everything, they send me the newsletter. And yeah, they are busy, you know. It's nothing to go into a community that you would never think that they would even put a supermarket in, but yet, you know, they have maybe 1+2 gardens in those neighborhoods. So,
Yeah, community gardens are very important for food security, and backyard gardens are as well, and I definitely encourage that. Okay, so looking in those other green zones, we have Grand Rapids, Michigan, population 196,000. They had 40 farmers market hours a week. They did have 2 markets on the same day on Saturday, but they were separated by about 16.5 miles. And the rest of the farmers markets were spread throughout the week. They did have a cluster of markets that were on the same day on Thursday. The farm I looked at there, Visser Farms, they have 5 farmers markets, a farm store, and they also sell wholesale, so 7 total markets. And they had 27 acres in production, so 0.26 acres per market. So about 4 acres of production for each market that they served. Rochester, New York, population 207,000. They had 36 market hours a week. And most of their markets were spread out on different days. They only had 1 market on Saturday, their City of Rochester Public Market, which also happened on Thursday and Tuesday. But there wasn't much competition between those markets. The farm that I looked at there, Sunscape Farms, they had 1 farmer's market that they went to, 2 farm stores that looked like they were really nice farm stores. And they also had a CSA marketplace. So 4 total markets. And they had 52.5 acres in vegetable and small fruit production for a market to acre ratio of 0.07 acres per market. So that farm was the most profitable farm that I found with their market to acre ratio. Okay, so if you look at Virginia, this map here, Virginia, all the green shows the prime agricultural land. So prime agricultural land is flat land that is well suited for wholesale production of vegetables. Flat land, you know, when you grow vegetables, you've got to disturb the soil. Disturbed soil is going to erode when it rains. So if you have flat land, you can grow a lot of vegetables without your soil washing away. If you look at the mountainous areas of the state, there's not a lot of prime agricultural land there. Wholesale production of farm crops in those areas on steep areas is typically cattle and animals because they're going to be grazing grasses. The grasses are permanently covering the soil, preventing it from washing away, as well as tree fruits and perennial crops, because those are permanently covering the soil and you can grow those in a sustainable way without your soil washing away. If you disturb the ground and it's steep, it's going to rain, soil is going to wash away, and it's not going to be very sustainable. So zooming in the Roanoke area here, you can see Roanoke does not have a lot of prime agricultural land. Most of the land around here is steep, and all of our wholesale production is better suited for animals because of that steep topography. And as a result, we don't have a lot of wholesale vegetable producers in our region. Also looked at market assessment in support of a Roanoke food hub feasibility report in 2019. And that report had some interesting statements in it. They stated, our assessment of the producers currently working with the local food aggregator in some capacity is that by and large, they produce relatively low volumes of a high diversity of produce on very small farms. The bulk of these producers do not produce volumes of products sufficient to act as anchor volumes for a food hub. They also found there are a few producers with higher production capacity or a desire to increase capacity, but it is unclear if those entities have a strong interest in wholesale sales. In our view, those farm businesses that have expanded beyond small market garden capacity have done so via outlets that still offer relatively high prices, such as farm-based CSAs, community supported agriculture, business to business sales, or other direct to consumer opportunities. It is unclear how these and other producers might react to wholesale pricing. Some other things they found, some notable themes that emerged from conversations with producers include concern over wholesale versus retail pricing, concern over trusting the care of product to a third-party entity, and concerns over the risk of expansion. I also did an informal survey of people that were just moving to Roanoke or wanted to move to Roanoke. So I found a couple that moved to Roanoke from Colorado to Benton. And I asked them, I asked these people, have you been to the farmer's market? Which one? And what did you think of it? And they said that they were proud of the farmer's market in Benton. They had seen a farmer selling there, but they didn't know when the hours were and had never made any purchases. I found another lady from New Mexico who was looking to move to Roanoke, and she was a foodie and interested in our local food scene. She said that she went to the downtown market first and described it as more of a craft fair, and then went to the Grandin market and said it felt more like a farmer's market. I also asked a new resident who had just moved to the area, who had lived and traveled the world. And she said that she was disappointed in our farmers markets and asked, what is wrong with the farmers markets in Roanoke? I also asked a traveling nurse from West Virginia, who was in town for 6 months, working as a travel nurse. She said that she went to the downtown market and described the produce as smaller than supermarket produce. She said that she wanted to go to the Grandin market, but hasn't been there yet. So I also looked at Master Gardener contacts at the farmers market. So the Master Gardeners do tabling events at the farmers markets, and they keep track of their contacts. So at the Salem market, which they've been to several times, they had 61 and 65 contacts. At the Botetourt market, they had 58, and at the Grandin market, they had 8, which indicates that the Salem market is the busiest. I also looked at research. Yes.
That blue button that says admit, someone's waiting to get on the phone.
Thank you. Okay, I also looked at factors affecting sales at farmers markets. And this was a study that was done in Iowa. And that research showed that the size of the population in the market locale and the distance from other competing markets contributed positively to the overall success of those markets. Per capita income of residents in the community hosting the market also had a significant positive effect on per vendor sales as well. These results are in agreement with those found in many previous studies of farmers market activities. That same research also stated, as new markets are opened, location and timing with respect to other established markets is an important consideration. Competition from a nearby market had a negative effect on per vendor sales, even when the possible secondary status of a market was taken into account. Coordination and scheduling of market days are important, they determined. So if you look at the raw data here and the p-value, so the lower the p-value, the more significant the relationship. So you can see the population of the city and the population of the area serving the farmers market had the greatest impact or significance on sales at that market. You can see the highlighted in yellow, the closest market also had a huge impact, but that's a negative impact. So the closer the markets are together, the less the sales are at those markets. And it hurts it hurts both markets or all markets. And that had a greater effect than per capita income, which was also significant. But what wasn't significant was the percent of people with bachelor's degree and percent with graduate degree. And the market age also was not significant. Okay, some more research that I looked at, economic challenges for Atlanta's small farmers, creating a financially sustainable local food supply. They stated that in many urban areas, farmers struggle to make a profit because they are being stretched too thin across multiple markets. In cities such as Seattle and San Francisco, consumers want a farmer's market in every neighborhood. However, this number of farmers markets may surpass demand from customers, particularly as other options for procuring local food expand. This means that farmers must attend more markets per week to make the same profit as they did a few years ago, reducing the time spent in field. So basically, food access is in competition with farm profitability. Everyone wants a farmer's market in their neighborhood, but it's not realistic to have a farmer's market in every neighborhood because that stretches our farmers too thin, and then the farmers markets are not profitable anymore. And then Diane Egert, the executive director of the Farmers Market Federation of New York, I think she puts it pretty bluntly here. There are way too many markets. The markets have started cannibalizing both customers and farmers from other markets to keep going. So if you look at the farmers market situation in Roanoke, we have 130 farmers market hours a week. And we have 5 farmers markets on the same day and at the same time. We also have a lot of farmers market advertised as being open, but when I've gone there, no one is there to do business. Okay, looking at our the markets in the Roanoke region, the Blacksburg Farmers Market, which is the most profitable. Blacksburg has about half the population of Roanoke. They have one farmers market on Saturday and another market on Wednesday. The total markets for that county is 18. Or total market hours for that county is 18. Floyd County also has a pretty profitable market. They have one market on Saturday and they have one market on Thursday, total 8 market hours a week. All right, any questions about farmers markets before we move on to CSA? Yes, sir.
And you, when you showed the study that had the highlighted key values, you said that the impact of median income was one of the higher ones. And you did all those comparisons, showing similarly sized cities. Do you know what the comparison, I can't read the details from here, but those comparisons include median income in those areas as well?
No, yeah, and median income was not as significant as proximity to adjacent farmers markets had more of an impact than the median income. Although the median income did have an impact. Good question. Any more questions? Yes, sir.
I thought it was interesting you mentioned kind of Nashville, like how spread out so much the farmers markets were, and then the Atlanta case study, which is like, you know, everybody wants one. It's like, be careful what you wish for, you just might get it. And so like knowing that, you know, there's this dichotomy, right, of like we want them in our backyards. But if we have in our backyard, kind of squeezing market, how can local producers and local advocates work together to try to create a more like sustainable food system that kind of finds that balance between access and profit?
Yeah, that's a really good and important question, and I don't know the answer to that. I mean, when I was farming, you know, my CSA customers, every customer wanted a CSA pickup on a different day of the week, you know, and that just wasn't feasible for me because I didn't have the time to do that. So I had to limit them to picking up, you know, on Tuesday and on Friday. I can't remember exactly what days we had our pickups, but I had to limit the pickup days because I just couldn't devote that much time to marketing and selling produce. So yeah, it requires coordination between markets, coordination and educating the customers, and coordinating and educating the market owners and city officials as well. Yes, sir.
Do you know, with our local farmers, if there's a reaction to market profitability that correlates with increased prices? I mean, I used to sell at Grandin and West End, and I sold everything much more at Grandin because people would buy it than West End, and I know that they're very close to one another, but they very much seem to fall different community members, generally speaking. But there was also still, I mean, and this was a number of years ago, but I was selling lettuce at a price I wouldn't buy it. And, you know, I love to support local farmers, but I'm like, I just can't afford the idea of going out and paying $12 for a pound of lettuce. It just doesn't make sense in my head. Do you know if some of that is a response to the market profitability? And I know that's a question that's maybe hard to answer without interviewing each one of those people. But is there a conversation about that?
I mean, that's a good question that I don't know the answer to. I mean, it does make sense, you know, the more you're selling, you can sell it for less. You know, if you're having a hard time selling your product, and you have to go to 5 or have 5 different marketplaces to sell a small amount of product, then you're obviously spending a lot of time selling your product, and you're going to have to, because you're spending so much time and energy selling your product, you're going to have to sell it for for a higher amount to make ends meet if you want to be profitable. So yes, the more, the less markets you have to sell at if you're a farmer, and the more profitable those markets are. Like if you're, growing $1,000 worth of produce and you can sell that all at one market, then your cost of production is going to be far less than if you have to sell that $1,000 worth of produce at 5 markets. Okay, so now let's move on to the CSA, Community Supported Agriculture section. So community supported agriculture is basically a subscription service where farmers basically buy a share of your farm, and then you commit to delivering them a box of farm goods every week to either a pickup location, or some farms even deliver direct to people's doors. So the typical evolution for me as a farmer and for a lot of other farmers that I've talked to, they start out selling at farmers markets. That allows you to figure out your cropping systems, gain efficiencies and confidence. Once you have that confidence, then you move on to CSA, because CSA is a little more of a commitment. So you have to have your efficiencies and your farming skills in order before you move on to CSA. And then basically as you grow, as your CSA grows, if you still have excess capacity and can't sell any more CSA shares, then that's when I moved into wholesale production, started selling wholesale. The history of CSA, so it started off as a philosophy by Rudolf Steiner, and it was brought to the United States by Northeast farmers. And basically it's designed to keep money generated by the land circulating within the local economy. For a farmer, it gives you wholesale ease with retail pricing. It helps with crop planning because because you're pre-selling your product, you can basically plan your crop production out for the entire year and know that you've sold it. It also helps with harvesting and packaging and distribution. It gives you a rainy day guarantee, which is really important for farmers. If it rains and you're going to a farmer's market, you're not going to make a lot of sales at that farmer's market because that farmer's market is going to be rained out. But if it rains and you sold the CSA share, people are going to pick up that CSA share because they prepaid for that CSA. So you're going to get that customer rainy day or not. It also simplifies payments, gives you funding up front, and allows you to basically create a diversified cropping system, which allows easy rotation of crops. So there's different CSA models. There's the traditional CSA model. This is where members commit in late winter, early spring to the CSA program that runs for between 20 to 30 weeks out of the year. There's either one or multiple size options you can choose from. A lot of farmers are now going to customization through online selection. When I did it, it was a little more low tech. We just had a substitution box So if you didn't like what was in your box, you put it in the substitution box, and hopefully there was something else in there you could pull out of that to compensate yourself for that donation. And then a lot of farms offer different add-on potential. There's the work share CSA model, and this is where shareholders assist the farm with tasks in exchange for either a reduced price or a free share. It's typically a formal agreement, which includes, the duties, the time commitment, the liability, and any breach of contract. And of course, there's hybrids of these systems. When I had an on-farm pickup for my CSA program, we hated picking cherry tomatoes. It took a lot of time. Our customers loved picking cherry tomatoes, so they would participate in the picking of cherry tomatoes and picking of flowers, which we didn't like to do. Yes, sir.
I think his name was Kevin, the tax guy. He had mentioned the issues of for-profit farms having like volunteer work, and I'm curious about this piece. But what's the if he's still there to answer? It sounds like you're getting like temporary employees, and like how do you know what their rate of like compensation is in this? How does that does that create issues?
That's a really good question. I'm not a tax expert, so it's hard for me to answer that. But if Kevin's still there, I don't know, can you speak to that, Kevin? I don't know if Kevin's still there. Okay, and then there's the workplace CSA model. We're a wellness funded business, offers a group CSA to employees. This is ideal for farmers because it guarantees a critical mass of customers as well as a convenient delivery location. You just drop it off to that business. Some businesses offer payroll deductions or stipends for employees to participate in this. Of course, your employees are going to be eating all this fresh local produce, so hopefully it'll be healthier and it will reduce your costs as a business and their increase in health. Hospitals are at the forefront of this, but this could also be a church, a neighborhood group, or a gym. Typically, there's a coordinator that helps recruit and they get a discount or a free share for their efforts. There's also the market share CSA model where customers pay up front and then they select produce at the farmer's market. Then you also, typically the shareholders receive a discount for paying up front as a result of that. And there's also buy down models, buy down CSA models where basically you pay a lump sum at the beginning of the season and then pay that down. And then there's pay it forward models where basically farm share members or other organizations sponsor shares, and then those shares are given to people in need. And then add-on products, some farms offer specialty product add-ons like fruit. I did a fruit add-on for my CSA, eggs, honey, meat, flowers, etc. If the farms are not diversified farms, sometimes those add-ons might come from other farms. And those farms are basically acting as aggregators or food hubs in that situation. But it's important if you're doing this as a farmer to provide detailed information about the other farms that you're collaborating with if the produce is not grown by the farm. And then there's the multi-farm CSA model. This is where multiple growers coordinate to provide supplies for a CSA, kind of like a farmer cooperative. And this allows farmers to specialize in specific crops, or if instead of growing like 3 successions of beans, they can grow 1 succession of bean, and then maybe other farms are growing the other successions, so you don't have to grow so many successions. But the Farmer Toolkit, which is published by Appalachian Sustainable Agriculture Project, it's a great resource for farmers. I recommend everyone read that if you're a farmer.
Say that again.
The Farmer Toolkit. It's a great resource for whole farm planning. And it's free, available free online. But a lot of this information came from them. But they state in there about multi-farm CSAs. However, an almost philosophical debate is underway about multi-farm CSAs. Is the direct relationship between a single farm, its farmers, and its customers absolutely essential to the concept of a CSA? How much product can come from other local farms before some perceived value is lost? Because typically with traditional CSA, you're making an investment in a farm. In this situation, you could be investing in multiple farms. So what is not a farm share is a box of veggies from an aggregator or a food hub. It's not possible for an aggregator or a food hub to match the freshness of a real farm share. Farm share is coming direct from that farm, and it's always going to be fresher than a box of veggies or a box of produce that comes from an aggregator or a food hub. And it's important to differentiate between those two products, because if a customer purchases a box of veggies from an aggregator and they think that it's a farm share, and the quality of that box of veggies is far less than what they would receive with a real farm share, then that degrades the marketability of the real farm shares for real farms. With the farm share, farmers are paid 90 to 100% of retail pricing. With a box of veggies from an aggregator, farmers are selling their produce to another food hub or an aggregator, and they're not receiving the same amount of money as they would if they sold that themselves. Typically, that's 50 to 80% of retail pricing. With a farm share, your purchasing supports a local farmer and the local economy. With a aggregator, products could be imported from outside the region, from other distributors or farmers from much further away, which dilutes the money that's circulated within that local economy. With a farm share, consumers are connected to a very specific farm. You're basically buying a share in that farm like you would buy stocks in a company, specific company. You're buying a share of that specific farm. With an aggregator, with a box of veggies from an aggregator, the consumer is connected to the aggregator and not necessarily specific farms or farm. I sold to a food hub aggregator in Charlotte, North Carolina, called Fresh List. They started out selling veggie boxes and veggie kits, and eventually started calling them harvest boxes, but they didn't call their product a farm share because they're a food hub and aggregator. They're not a farm. So they were very truthful in their advertising. So I did an analysis of the farm share CSA marketplace in Roanoke in the spring of 2023. And I asked our CSA farmers, how many farm shares have you sold and how many farm shares did you want to sell? And all of our farms selling farm shares, except for one, needed to sell more farm shares. The one farm that was selling out of their farm shares was offering their farm shares for a much lower price than the national average and the local average. But we had, like, some farmers had a goal of selling 100 farm shares and were only able to sell 20. One farmer that needed to sell a lot more farm shares is now out of business. So most of the farm shares were being sold by a nonprofit aggregator that is not a farm. So the non-farm CSA shares being sold were 186, and the farm representing 40% of the total market. And the farm CSA shares being sold were 286, representing 60% of the market. So if you take the two top CSAs, including the nonprofit aggregator selling farm shares, and the top farm selling farm shares, that represents 67% of the total market. And the bottom six farm selling CSA shares represented 33% of the marketplace. And it was very difficult for them to get a foothold in that market, it seemed like. Do nonprofits sell CSA shares? So I know of nonprofit farms selling CSA shares like Lynchburg Grows. There's a lot of nonprofits selling cost offset CSAs where the cost of the CSA is offset to make it available to people in need, or they're doing a produce subscription program to make produce available to those in need. After scouring through the country, I did find 3 nonprofit aggregators that were selling full price CSA shares and competing with farmers directly on the CSA marketplace. And 2 of those aggregators were calling their product a farm share. One of those aggregators is in Roanoke. Many of the for-profit aggregators that are selling CSA shares, like Fresh List in Charlotte, call it a harvest box. Full Circle Seattle and Washington call it a farm box, and Farm Fresh to You does a farm box delivery, but I couldn't find any for-profit aggregators selling, calling their product a farm share. So this is just, I'm not gonna go into this, this is just a list of all the nonprofit aggregators that I found. So they basically break down into that category of basically providing food to the needy, you know, cost offsetting that produce so people in need can get it. Or doing some kind of distribution, but there were only those 3 that I found that were competing directly with farmers on that marketplace. And then the for-profit aggregators and food hubs in the United States that are doing this. Okay, there is some research on different models for the cost offset CSA programs, where basically these nonprofits are reducing the cost of that produce to make it available for need. And different ones do it different ways after looking through this research, but the cost is offset anywhere between 5 and 75% to make that produce available to those in need and serve that charitable function. All right, any questions on the CSA portion of our presentation? Okay, another interesting thing I want to talk about is the Fresh Match program in Virginia. So this is a program that's done all around the country where basically state or federal funds are used to double people's spending who have SNAP or EBT qualifications. So if you are a person in need and you have SNAP or EBT, you can basically go to a market and you can basically double the amount that you spend at those markets using these programs. So different states call them different things. Some states call them market bucks. In Virginia, we call it the Fresh Match program. So what was interesting in Virginia is that what's unique in Virginia is that the nonprofit that's the fiscal agent for the Fresh Match program is also competing directly with farmers markets. They're competing with farmers on the CSA marketplace, and they're also competing with grocery stores. So that was highly unusual, and I haven't found that anywhere else in the country. So I looked at all the market bucks and Fresh Match programs that double EBT spending. I looked at who the fiscal agents were and what they did, and basically it breaks down into, you know, there are nonprofits like this one in Michigan, Fair Food Network. And they basically were the fiscal agent for the Market Bucks program. And the other function that they performed was impact investing, where they basically invest money in entrepreneurs and other businesses to help those businesses out. They weren't competing with farmers markets. They weren't competing with CSA programs. They weren't competing with grocery stores. They were investing in those businesses to make them successful. So this is the example of the state organization. And for example, in South Carolina, the Department of Social Services handles the Healthy Bucks program. This is one other category that I found. For example, in Florida, they have Feeding Florida, which is similar to Feeding Southwest Virginia. They handle their Market Bucks program. It's a food bank service that basically gets food to people who need food and provides it at low or no cost. All right, any questions on the Fresh Match program? Yes, sir.
Kind of related to my earlier question, if you look at the cost of food at our markets and then you effectively have it because of the SNAP, are we even starting to approach like the cost if I were to go to say like a big box store like Walmart and make my purchase of food? I know, for example, what I said earlier about like a 12-pound bag, $12 bag of lettuce. Lettuce at Walmart isn't $6 for a pound, right? So, and was there any analysis done on that? Just particularly for the Roanoke market, where you're going to the.
No, that would be a good analysis to do, though. But I am concerned about that conflict of interest with our fiscal agent. For example, I talked to a farmer he was concerned about the profitability of the markets, but was also concerned about upsetting anything that could affect all the money he was making through that fresh match program. Yes, Brent?
I think clientele that you buys the snap or BBT, how does that compare to the clientele normal shops and farm markets?
Yeah,
You know, two different, socioeconomic needs. Typically your snap, and I'm not trying to be ugly, snap or BBT, probably not the people that are going to shop typically. Right, farmers market.
That's the question.
yeah, that's a good question. That's a good observation.
But I mean, some of it has changed because of the consciousness and, helping with, our Eat Smart, more programs like that. Then, even though they are recipients of those, amenities and help, to businesses, that the more we are able to help them to understand the importance, then they're more apt to try to eat healthier and eat fresher. So you got a lot of gaps in there that would help, like, some of us work together in educating, as to how to use that. And I guess it's kind of looking at, you can leave the horse to the water, but you can't make them drink. And, so I guess if you teach the horse that it's important for you to drink, maybe he'll try. You know? But my question is like, so now I'm understanding a little bit better that margin, we always look at, well, most people can't afford it, you know? And so that's helping me to understand what you explained about the recipients and how they're invested, to look at our largest organization in the area. Then I'm understanding a little bit better why their prices are so exorbitant in comparison to making it to the supermarket.
Explain how Virginia system has a conflict versus other states.
Yeah, the other states, the organizations that are fiscal agents for their SNAP EBT programs that double their spending aren't organizations that are competing directly with farmers, aren't competing with markets, and aren't competing with other grocery stores.
How is ours competing?
So the fiscal agent in Virginia is basically operating a CSA program that basically sells full price CSA shares, competing with farmers. They also operate a farmers market, which is competing with adjacent farmers markets. And they also operate a grocery store, which is competing with grocery stores
So I'm here specifically wrong.
in Virginia and Roanoke, yes.
As
Yes.
far as the producer, so do they pay the same price per box of apples as a producer, we sell to them? SNAP people, same as CSA, or is it?
Yeah, if you participate in that SNAP program at a farmer's market, yeah,
Use the same product.
yeah, it's the same, yeah, but it's a way for farmers to make.
We have too much stuff here.
Yeah. Okay, another interesting thing in Roanoke, which happened more recently, is nonprofit grocery stores. I thought that was interesting, because that seems like another unfair competitive advantage that they would have with our for-profit groceries. So I looked to see in the United States how many nonprofit grocery stores we have, and I found quite a few across the United States. And we have 2 in Roanoke. And these grocery stores are basically working to provide affordable groceries to people in need. But looking at our grocery, nonprofit grocery stores in Roanoke, you know, we do have for-profit grocery stores adjacent to these groceries, and I'm not sure what kind of impact it's having on their sales. You know, we have one right across the street from this one here, so I think that, you know, there is an unfair competition between for-profits and nonprofit businesses. So I think it's important to make sure, you know, if we want our for-profit businesses to be successful, we need to create a fair marketplace for those for-profit businesses.
The
between nonprofit and for-profit? Doesn't everybody get paid to work there, or are you working there for free?
Yeah, a nonprofit basically has some advantages, some tax advantages. They have access to grants and funds that for-profit businesses do not have access to. They have,
But the people working there still get paid, and
well,
Okay.
not necessarily, because nonprofits are allowed to use volunteer labor, whereas for-profit businesses are required to pay their employees a minimum wage. Yes, sir.
Does Food Giant, I don't think Food Giant has fresh produce there.
I'm not sure.
He's having right across the street, didn't Mark, they've been there on time.
Yeah, right next to the market.
I don't know if they have them there to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's almost more like a large store.
Yeah.
An actual.
That's not a grocery store, that's a deck. The name brand grocery store will not set up in that area for many reasons. I'll have to get into it. This was not really set up in competition with anywhere, it's set up as like an emergency. My opinion on one.
Well, no, I'd like to say, the concept behind it was to address the fact that it definitely was in the desert, that we know it's been a desert for quite a while, over 25 years. And I think the explanation I got, it has ended, it is now operating because of the cost. And that they had to bring these other partners in, and the entities that are in there, they're hoping that it will balance out. Because many of the people that patronize it say themselves, no, the price does not warrant it being marketed as affordable, okay? But hoping that the involvement, because of the other partners and the entities coming in, and the wellness facilities and all, that the people will see it is a balance there. They just have to, I guess we just have to be patient before we get a true analysis of how successful it is.
All right, yeah. So in conclusion, the law of supply and demand applies to all industries, including, agriculture and farming. We all would like to have fresh local produce on our table to eat, and I'm sure we all want to see, farming in our landscape. When we drive through our country and drive through our city, we'd like to see farms as our landscape, not just, housing developments. And if we want to make that, keep that around and keep that a possibility for us, we need to ensure that farming is a viable business, profitable business. And that way, those businesses can be passed down to other people, instead of being sold for the next housing development.
I'm curious. How can people here are first generation farmers? We're trying to be. I mean, I'm just curious.
That's a good question.
Who here is first generation?
First generation farmers.
Farms have no family experience.
I'm a third generation farmer. Just curious.
Sure.
Yeah. That's trying to
Any questions, Michael?
I was just curious. Seems like myself, anyway.
Well, I would like to say something, and I know that a couple of other people that have, dedicated ourselves towards that. Being, people that are compassionate and have some education as well. And we want to continue what we were trained to do. In order to have a healthier populace of people, we have found that many of them need assisted in how to know what to do. I mean, for an example, if there are any musicians in the room, that they can truly understand what I'm about to use as an example. Talking about the gourd, okay, the gourd is of course a vegetable that we turned into a musical instrument, most often. So when the musician says to me after the class, that was a gourd, and I'm like, I had to get a grip on me to not offend them, to say, oh, you talking about people,
Or birdhouse.
So now we can be so good, or we think that's like, you think that you're being so great at what we're doing, but we find out we're really not that good at what we're doing because we're not effective. So here you give these people a box of fresh fruits and I mean, what we do, it is a little bit unique. We got a lot of people with the talk about it. We want to make a profit. We don't want to be like that, but we don't have to. Okay, because we're the ones who get out here and brave the weather and the elements in order to give this fresh, healthy, organic food.
Amen.
And that's it, that's what we're about. So now, when you take it and deliver it some, I mean, we all learn from each other. My heart was broken for one of the volunteers that work with this particular entity to come and tell me, they said, we're gonna keep giving these people this food. A lot of that food end up in the garbage can. And I was like, what? You know, all that labor and you know, and everything it is up in the garbage can, let me check out what's going on. And what I found was just like they having multiple people at the marketplace, we have markets at the same time, the same day. It's kind of like that in that one, map it out, plan it out. Okay, so I ended up asking the individual or the recipient, is this a good day? You know, is this really the ideal day for you all? Because I was informed that the produce sometimes not making it to the families, but to the college home. And that really offends me a lot. So it was like, yes, it's the day, but it had to be at a certain time. A time when we have people to work with us to receive the produce and prepare it to be distributed. So now, what's the best thing that we can do, those of us on Jenny Cooperative Extension? So graciously trained us, is we want assistance in getting back into the community where we're needed. Now, we had 2 changes, and both of those, one individual that wanted to get out there was not being assisted by someone else that was in a position over them. And then the one, even the situation that it is right now, does not seem to respond to the need. One individual might be very well versed, and I know I can say by myself, I think I know what I'm doing when I take on something to do. But I also know, as good as I am, I cannot do it by myself. Okay, and when I reach out for help, I really get some. So that's what I'm saying. You still got master food volunteers that want to be out in the community, but yet are you ever assigned? We have never reached out to them. So we feel like all that time and study and working that we did, it's almost like a waste right now.
Yeah, we do need to get more cooking demonstrations. I think that's a huge need. Teach people
Absolutely.
how to use the food that we're growing now in all these community gardens.
And here's what we said, how do we do, we wear our badge or do we not? For me, I just say, I know how to cook out here down there, you know, and I don't wear the badge.
Let me get to Hunter's question.
So maybe a bit more of a comment or a question if there's like possible follow-up. So I'm looking at this and also trying to place this presentation in a wider context. So for instance, like SNAP benefits being cut nationwide is like a huge issue. Food insecurity with tariffs, where a lot of our food is imported from outside the country, are a huge issue. So domestic production is a huge opportunity. But we're also existing in like a long-term economic recession. It probably will continue to exist in one. So that's my analysis. You can disagree if you want, but I won't be taking questions. But that reality is just one of those things where like planning and navigating through that seems like a group task. Not individual tasks for like my business is going to navigate it this way because my business is susceptible to all of these factors that we have no control over. We don't have control over them at the local level or the state level. You know, at the international level, we seem to barely have control over them. So I kind of present my analysis just to invite maybe there needs to be something else that follows from this, because it's great to know. But now there's, you know, there were 8 different farmers markets in the area and 5 or 6 different organizations that were managing those markets. If we want to have a conversation about like not having so many markets in order to improve profitability, the people who run those markets need to be willing to have questions and have the conversation. And if that's not happening, mean, I don't know what to do, but we're still sitting here having a conversation. So again, I just want to like add that context. This seems really important. You know, community food production is mostly what I do, as opposed to for profit, but I have sold before and I know how hard that is. You know, I would love people to not have to pay for food if they're working full time in some capacity, because we have enough money in this country to do that. It seems that we could just pay our farmers. If we've been doing that anyways, it's a highly subsidized industry. Our local farmers don't seem to get the benefit of the subsidy all the time. So, again, I just want to bring awareness to that context because, I want people in this room who are farming to still be farming. But I worry that money may become more and more tight at our local level as our national level seems insistent on driving something.
And I did invite all the market owners to come today. Thanks, Isaac, for coming. I really appreciate it. Are there any other market managers or owners here? Just the Salem.
Guys, coordinate days, times.
Yeah, Dave, let me say what.
No, no. But yeah, for the other, you guys sell. Yeah. But the 5 or 6 markets don't coordinate with each other, like you take Wednesdays, I'll take Thursdays.
Yeah,
so
okay, it's the right good stuff.
Okay, probably.
Yeah, because that's what seemed to me is what, Shawn was showing is that really wasn't a lot of cooperation.
Yeah.
You know, so that's good to hear that it is, because it seems oversaturated.
Was that a reaction in cooperation?
I think it was.
Well, yeah. But the other part of that, like Amanda said, it was getting at, is that people need to be educated and shown how to eat this, prepare this meat that they're getting, how to make the most of it and so on. That's one of the things that I'm particularly interested in doing. And so it's a lot more than just, you know, takes a village.
Also, for the group, I have a very selfish question. Anyone here growing fruit trees? I would take
They do.
mentors. I know nothing. I'm on the second year and I need to show everything. Anyone have any time to take on?
If Shawn is, we will be experts at growing the ones that are supposed to develop it.
So
Like the Asian pear.
I got my Asian pears, I got my Asian persimmons,
Okay.
I've been listening to it.
But now he gives us these warnings, but I guess we just have to wait our turn, you know, for him to tell us all the little other things that
Yeah,
we.
but I have still, it took me 4 hours to switch the.
When the pears will start getting juicy or bigger.
Sunflower done, way to go.
Yeah. You can do it. You can do it.
So we don't want